Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. In today's episode, let's talk about scrap wood. I'm not a very sophisticated carpenter, and so I haven't done that many very complicated wood-based projects, but I have become more comfortable with power tools over the years. And lately, I have noticed that my neighbors have been throwing out lots of very tempting-looking wood, which got me thinking about this source of trash. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, wood makes up about 6% of the waste stream. A lot of that wood comes from construction sites, but that's not the only source. And so today, let's talk about ways that you could get involved with reducing the waste caused by wood. So first of all, if you don't already have a stash of scrap wood, I have a bunch of ideas on places where you could get some so that you could practice your woodworking skills if you don't happen to have those already. The one that's kind of hot right now is wooden shipping pallets. If you go on Pinterest, you'll see there are just a ton of projects to make little organizer boxes, and some people take apart pallets and make kind of this really cool wood paneling in their homes. But the challenge with working with pallets is that some are treated with chemicals to ensure that they don't bring insects when they're shipping items from all over the world. So I'm going to link to a really helpful resource in the show notes that talks about how to look for the right kind of pallets. To summarize, it seems like you should just avoid the pallets that have the letters MB stamped on them, because that stands for methyl bromide, which is a very powerful insecticide. But there's a few other things to look for as well. The other downside of pallets is that they do take a fair bit of work to take apart, and you kind of have to have a certain kind of reciprocating saw to do it quickly. And then, of course, the quality of the wood is of a certain quality. If you're going for that look, it's great, but if you're looking for something more fancy, there are better sources. A second source of scrap wood is clementine boxes. These are those boxes that you get all the little tiny oranges around Christmas time usually, and it's a very thin balsa wood. This is great in some cases for certain crafts. You can take the box apart and use the components. Another great source for scrap wood are construction, demolition, and renovation projects. In my neighborhood, somebody's always fixing something. First, you need to connect with the homeowner or the contractors, and you could save yourself a bit of work and ask them to put the scraps to one side. But in some cases, they're just going to throw it in the dumpster. And in those cases, you have to get permission to get in the dumpster and get the stuff out. And you have to be super careful and watch out for nails and things like that. Another great source, at least in my town, is Trash Day. I don't know what, I think it's this time of year. A lot of people are throwing out wood scraps and also wooden furniture. And those are great sources of wood for your scrap projects. You can also find wood in your own garden. For example, if you have to trim back woody plants or branches, those can be used in certain projects. You can find wood at the beach. I'm going to talk later about an artist who makes art from driftwood. Another source of wood, if you live in a place where there's a lot of hockey, might be hockey sticks. Now, most players today don't actually use hockey sticks made from wood. They're using a different type of composite material. But I have saved some old wooden hockey sticks for nostalgic reasons, and I plan to use those in a special project. And you might be able to find those, especially in secondhand sporting goods stores. In an earlier episode, I talked about taking apart old mattresses and box springs, and there's a fair bit of wood inside those. The next idea would be barns. If you live in a place where there's a lot of old barns, if you can find out if they're going to tear down the barn, then this is a great source, and this type of wood is really prized. Another source of scrap wood would be to see whether there are any cabinet or furniture manufacturers in your town, because if you take their scraps, then they don't have to pay to have them hauled away. Next, there's the Habitat for Humanity re-stores. These are stores where people bring building supplies that they don't need anymore. And of course, these are not going to be free sources of scrap wood, but they will be much less than going to get new lumber. Plus, you're helping with the creative reuse of that lumber. And you can get big pieces of wood there as well as doors and windows. And finally, you can always reach out to your local FreeCycle community. If you just go to freecycle.org and find your local community, you can post a wanted ad for wood scraps. And I bet there will be lots of people who will be happy to clear out their basements for you. So those are all great sources of scrap wood. Next, I'm going to talk about some scrap wood projects that I've done this year, and hopefully that will inspire you to do some of your own. There are very simple wood projects that you can try, even if you haven't had much experience with woodworking. I don't have a lot of tools. I mostly just have a miter saw and a drill, but you can do a lot with just that. And I've saved a whole bunch of wood palette project ideas and other scrap wood project ideas on my Trashmagination Pinterest board, which I will link to in the show notes. So here are some of the projects that I've done this year. Really recently, I made a bunch of planter boxes, and this was the most ambitious woodworking project I've ever undertaken. We recently decided that we were going to take down a section of fence in our backyard because it was leaning over and we didn't really like the fence in the first place. We wanted to get more light into the yard. So we thought, we'll just take it down. And the wood in the fence was actually in pretty good shape. So I found a picture on Pinterest of some basic wooden boxes and I replicated those, but using the fencing wood. I still have a bunch of wood from that fence that I'm going to work on. In particular, there's these big, thick 6x6 fence posts, and I have a bunch of ideas for using that, so I'll talk about that in a future podcast. The next project that I did recently was something called an ornament tree. I've mentioned before that I play taiko or Japanese drums, and every year I break a few drumsticks, and I save them because the wood is pretty neat, but I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. But I had this idea to make kind of like a wooden tree to display ornaments. And the drumstick pieces were like tree branches sticking out of a center trunk. So to make it, I drilled holes in this piece of wood that were the same circular width as the drumsticks, and they stick out, and it made this really cute ornament tree. Another project I just finished involved block printing. Now, most of the time, block printing involves carving down into a piece of wood or a rubber tile. But in my case, I took a piece of scrap wood and I glued craft foam onto the wood in the shapes that I wanted to make the block prints. And then I sponged fabric paint onto the craft foam and I laid fabric over it to make the print. So block prints, that aesthetic is really popular right now, and it has kind of a modern aesthetic, and it's really easy to do with scrap wood. A project that I did a few years ago was a scavenger hunt. Now, this is a cool thing. My family enjoys doing corn mazes in the fall, and in one of the ones that we love the most, the farmers will make a scavenger hunt where they have these stations made out of scrap wood located throughout the maze. And each station reveals a section of the maze carved like a map into the wood. So for it to be revealed to us, we would have a piece of paper and we'd take a crayon and we'd rub over the bumps of the map until slowly, as we made our way all the way around the maze, we get a total image of the map. Another project that I've done in the past is nail and string art. Again, this doesn't require any woodworking skills whatsoever, as long as you can hammer a nail. So it just involves taking a piece of wood, and if it's in the size that you want the finished product, you don't even have to cut it. You then tap small nails in a design, and you stretch yarn between the nails to make an image. So my family did this for Halloween. We made a design that was a large skull, and we got the imagery, it was like clip art, off of the internet. I also saw that this new place in Portland, Oregon called the DIY Bar, it offers craft projects that you do while you're socializing. They have a nail and string art project where you make a map of the United States and then you put a red yarn heart in the places that are meaningful to you. I also admire the work of Agnes in August. She is a Canadian artist and she does what she calls mountain string art, meaning all her pieces look like mountains. And I don't think she uses scrap wood, but you totally could. Some projects that my family have done, these weren't done by me, but they were different family members. So the first one was my mom designed a planter box that looked like a sailboat on the waves. And she wanted to teach that as a class, and she managed to find all the wood for like 30 students by going around to construction sites in her area. So that was cool. She got all the materials for free. My brother-in-law, Isaiah, he is really great about scrap wood. He has this incredible collection of wood in his shed, and he uses a scroll saw to cut out elaborate shapes. Now, that's a whole level of woodworking above what I can do. My sister did a scrap wood project with broken rowing shells. She's a rowing coach, and one time she was coaching, and she noticed near the place that she was coaching that there was a bunch of bashed up rowing shells that had been blown by the wind and damaged beyond repair. So she brought them home, and I helped her cut them into lengths, because, rowing shells are super long, and we cut them into lengths that would make good bookshelves. So I will put pictures of all of my family's projects in the show notes. Next, I want to talk about artists I admire who use scrap wood. And the artist that I thought of first and foremost is Danish artist Thomas Dambo. One of his projects recently went viral. It involved making a scavenger hunt in parks around Copenhagen. He built these giants, like the mythical creature type of giants. He built them out of scrap wood, hidden under bridges or in these beautiful places in the forest. And this enticed the people to visit the more remote parts of these parks all around Copenhagen. And every December, he hosts an event called Remake Christmas. He builds a temporary wooden house all out of scrap wood and pallets in downtown Copenhagen. And the people come there and they make Christmas gifts like birdhouses or printed shirts. And he has taught hundreds of people how to make wooden birdhouses from scrap wood. Another project that Thomas recently shared was called Happy Forest. He built a series of inviting benches in a park, and he made triangle-shaped roofs that were made out of recycled billboard vinyl. So now you know why I want to visit Denmark and see all of Thomas's projects. And do you know how Thomas got started with wood scraps? His parents let him tear down a fence, just like we did. Another scrap wood artist who I admire is Kirsty Elson. She lives along the ocean in the United Kingdom, and she specializes in creating scenes of coastal towns, all from the driftwood that she finds on the beaches. And often this wood has bits of paint on it, and it incorporates metal. And she just has this way of looking at a piece of wood and imagining an object or a scene being made from it. I love how part of her artistic process is walking on the beach and just finding all her materials. There's a really great video of her where she explains how she does it, and I'll embed it in the show notes. When we think of scrap wood, mostly we think of bits of lumber, but it can also mean wood like branches or small trees. And an artist who works with branches is Lee Borthwick from London. And she cuts the branches into circles and she hangs them kind of circle side out into what she calls wood tapestries. And she also puts little circular mirrors on the wood, which makes a really cool effect. Zeke Leonard makes guitars from old pianos. Now, you wouldn't think there are so many old pianos just tossed on the side of the road, but he said you would be surprised. Zeke is a professor at Syracuse University in the School of Design, and he sets up musical instruments made from recycled materials in places all over where everyone can play them. He teaches people how to dismantle pianos, how to make banjos from cigar boxes, and even how to hang up the guts of a piano in the forest and compose music on it. The last thing I want to talk about is, let's say you have a bunch of scrap wood, and even though I've told you about all these amazing uses for scrap wood, you don't really feel like making anything with it. You just want to get rid of it. I'm going to encourage you to not just throw it in the trash. If you have a large amount of wood that you need to give away, there are better places for it than the trash. For example, there is a company called Dakota Timber Company that specializes in reclaiming wood from people who are deconstructing homes or doing other major projects. And you can find similar companies like Dakota Timber Company by Googling reclaimed lumber and looking in your area. For smaller pieces of scrap wood, you can look at anywhere where there is a wood shop. So, for example, my kids attended a summer camp at a place called the Kid Museum in Bethesda, Maryland. They were given a bunch of scrap wood in all different shapes and sizes, and they built whatever they wanted. And the camp counselors supervised their use of the tools, and they loved it. Some schools still have woodworking. When I was going through school, every school had a wood shop, but it is getting more and more rare, unfortunately. But some schools do have it, and I'm thinking specifically of a program called the Tinkering School, which is an educational program in schools located around various places in the United States where kids engineer stuff to solve real problems. So you could search for Tinkering School and see if there's one near you. And there's also the concept of maker spaces, and a lot of those have programs for youth that work with wood as well. If you make unusual items from scrap wood, I would love to hear about your project. Please let me know at trashmagination@gmail.com. Until next time, may you see trash as just another source of birdhouses and flower boxes in your life.